In times of universal deceit, truth is the only rebellion left.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion. Thanks for listening to the show. Today's topic is going to be about a former pastor, a deconstructed pastor, a pastor who I assume would define himself as an ex-evangelical, someone who has a large following right now. And in fact, one of his articles recently went viral in the national media. Fox picked it up and others picked it up. The guy's name is John Pavlovitz. That's Pavlovitz. Pavlovitz. John Pavlovitz or Pavlovitz. I don't know for sure which way you pronounce it. But I'm going to suggest today that we need to be very aggressive to pastors like this, to people who fancy themselves as our spiritual betters, those who think they can teach us what it means to be Christian or what it means to be a good person, even if they start denying the veracity of Christianity. They still think that they are America's pastors and that we should listen to them and listen to what they define as a good culture, a good society, and what it means to be good people. And I use those words in air quotes, good people. Sidebar, the Bible tells us that none of us are good, that for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And that if you claim to be without sin, you're making God out to be a liar. So this argument that out of radical humanism, which John Pavlovitz subscribes to, that somehow people are good by nature, and that the biblical ideas, the orthodox ideas of sinfulness, original sin, and penal substitution by Jesus Christ for those sins, and that the only way to address the sinfulness of mankind, the sinfulness of culture, your own personal sinfulness, is confession and forgiveness at the foot of the cross. Pavlovitz and his ilk deny all of that right now while still claiming to be our pastors. So the title of today's show is Pastors Like John Pavlovitz Should Be Shunned. We should aggressively dismiss them, personally, privately, and publicly. Why publicly? Because they're making their public pronouncements, and therefore the only thing we can do is issue a public response, and there's nothing unbiblical about doing so. Nothing. When somebody says something publicly, it invites a public response. Some people might say, well, you're obligated to follow Matthew 18 and go to this man personally before you put out a podcast like this. No, that's not what Matthew 18 calls for. When I say something publicly, I expect you to agree with it or disagree with it publicly. I'm the one who chose to make my commentary public, and therefore it invites and demands a public response. You're not obligated via Matthew 18 to approach me privately first, because I'm the one who chose to make it a public conversation in the first place. Remember that. That's a biblical principle, and you need to remember that if somebody throws out the Matthew 18 thing when you start responding to something in the internet, something that somebody said publicly, and you're challenged and scolded for doing so because, well, you didn't follow Matthew 18, you didn't call them up, you didn't contact them privately before you responded. A public response invites a public response. A public declaration, such as what I'm making right now, invites a public response. And I shouldn't be offended when you do so, when you respond to what I'm saying right now. I shouldn't, if I don't like what you say, I don't have any right to say, well, you shouldn't have said it at all. You should have contacted me privately. No, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And that's not the teaching of Matthew 18. Before we get into this discussion of this pastor, quote unquote, John Pavlovitz, who is saying some pretty aggressive things right now about anybody who supports Donald Trump, anybody who voted for Donald Trump, anybody who says they're a conservative Christian and votes for the Republican Party, as opposed to the party of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and Zohar Mamdani and all the rest, AOC. If we think the lesser of two evils is the party of Trump and MAGA versus the party of AOC and Mamdani and Biden and Clinton and the crew, if we think we're getting more freedom by voting Trump as opposed to voting Biden or voting for Harris, if we think that the lesser of the two evils, and I will agree, no party is perfect. There's evil in both parties. Both parties sometimes are embarrassingly sinful, but our obligation in a democracy, in a constitutional republic like the United States of America, I would argue is to vote for the greatest measure of human freedom that you can get in any election. And I don't apologize for that. If you say that, and if you believe that the American system is frankly a better system than other countries in providing us the opportunity to vote for such freedoms, and if you think that the Republican Party under the leadership of Donald Trump right now in its policies that are correcting the cultural lunacy of transgendering children, for example, and butchering babies at Planned Parenthood, and the confiscatory tax policies which steal money from one group of people and one individual and redistribute that money to others who have not worked for it. If you think that the policies of Trump right now, in terms of pursuing peace on the world stage, with regard to Gaza and Iran and Russia and other conflicts that are taking place in Indochina and as well as in Africa, if you think that Trump's policies are working better than the policies of Biden and Harris, then somehow you're a terrible human being. You're a terrible human being, and you can't even claim the banner of Christ, according to pastors like John Pavlovitz. Before we get into that, however, remember that the organization that sponsors the rebellion is equippingthepersecuted.org. As I've told you many times over, this is an organization that provides supplies, medical supplies, hospitals, schools, school supplies, even basic sustenance like food and blankets and tents for displaced Christians, persecuted Christians in Nigeria. This is an organization, Equipping the Persecuted, that goes into these communities and provides all of this stuff because tens of thousands of Christians have lost their homes, and unfortunately, thousands upon thousands have also lost their lives, leaving children without parents and women without husbands. Therefore, you have a lot of widows, you have a lot of orphans that need assistance right now, and you have villages that haven't been attacked yet that need to be taught how to secure their communities, how to defend themselves before the persecution, before the attack comes. Equipping the Persecuted does that. About 80% of your dollar goes to support the actual Christians that are suffering as opposed to covering administrative overhead, which is unusual in many 501c3 nonprofit organizations. In other words, your dollar goes to what you want it to go toward, not in paying the salaries of a bloated administrative infrastructure. Go to equippingthepersecuted.org today. That's one word, equippingthepersecuted.org, and make a tax-deductible gift today. Back to the show. So the title is Pastors Like John Pavlovitz Should Be Shunned. So in an August 2nd essay, John Pavlovitz, a man who describes himself as, this is his own description, a writer, pastor, and activist from Wake Forest, North Carolina, he posted an essay on Substack that was picked up by the establishment media and went viral from coast to coast. Like I said, Fox News picked it up, others picked it up. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people have read this article and read what he said in terms of his scolding of Republicans, his scolding of conservative Christians, his scolding of anybody who would dare to check the box for a Republican, and in this particular case, Donald Trump versus the Democrat. The article by Pavlovitz was titled, "No, Good People Don't Still Support Him." That's the title of his article. And the him, as you've probably figured out, that Pavlovitz is referring to is Donald Trump. And those he's accusing of being bad people by inference are all the voters who still support the president and his policies. So again, Pavlovitz's argument is this: no, good people don't still support him. And then again, him is a reference to Donald Trump, and the lack of good people, the bad people that he's accusing by default of being terrible human beings, are you and me, the voters who still support the president's policies over and above the alternative. Now, here's part of what Pavlovitz says in his column. It's a long column. I'm not going to give much attention to the whole thing, but this is the basic argument. Donald Trump is the very worst humanity has produced. a moral bottom feeder without scruples or conscience or decency. And good people don't align with this. No, good people don't spend their every waking day generating misery, stoking division, causing suffering. And good people don't defend people who do. Close quote. Now I'm going to read it for you again. There's lots of fallacies, straw men, just in that brief 1 or 2 sentence statement. And his whole argument is fallacious and self-refuting, and that's going to be basically the context of everything I'm going to say from here on out. As the reason why we should just step away from these people, distance ourselves from them, and not be afraid or embarrassed to say, that is stupid, that is wrong, that's fallacious, it makes no sense, it is backwards in every way, and it's actually a straw man. It will fall easily of its own weight if we just bother to say, wait a second, what are you talking about? So this is his quote again. Donald Trump is the very worst humanity has produced, a moral bottom feeder without scruples or conscience or decency. And good people don't align with this. No, good people don't spend their every waking day generating misery, stoking division, and causing suffering. And good people don't defend people who do, close quote. So aside from the fact that as a voter for Donald Trump, and someone who has criticized him in public, as you know, and some of you who are more pro-MAGA, pro-Donald Trump than I am, have been very uncomfortable and have called me out. You don't like it when I criticize him. And I've said many times over, I'm not going to apologize for criticizing my own when they're wrong, because I'm going to publicly thank them when they're right. That's what conservatives do. Conservatives believe in conserving ideas, in conserving principles. We don't believe in being personality cults. We don't protect the person. We protect the principles, the ideas. That's what a conservative is. So I think I'm obligated to thank our leaders when they're right and criticize our leaders when they're wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. If you don't like it when I say that, I'm sorry. But that's what I believe conservatives should do. Now, for those of you who are more pro-MAGA than me, you kind of have to hold your nose when, some of you do, when I say stuff like that. And you've stuck with me through that particular debate. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening right now. But just because I'm critical of Donald Trump doesn't mean I'm going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, or that I'm going to vote for somebody that is 10 times worse and policies that are 100 times worse than those of Donald Trump. But by definition, Pavlovitz is suggesting that by voting for Donald Trump or the Republican Party or conservatism versus radical progressivism, that I am by definition spending every waking day generating misery, stoking division, and causing suffering. Really? Just by saying what I'm saying and holding the principles that I hold, being pro-life and saying that babies shouldn't be butchered 5 seconds before they're born. Being pro-woman and saying that it's misogyny for men to pretend to be women and dress up in drag and mock and blackface women by the way they behave, dancing in the streets and having drag queen parties in the park. Does that mean that I'm stoking division, that I'm generating misery, and that I'm causing suffering? Am I causing suffering by suggesting that people who work hard should have the right to retain the private property that they have acquired through that work? Is that generating misery? Am I generating misery and stoking division and being hateful by suggesting that our southern border should be defended and secured because tens of millions of illegal immigrants flowing across those borders and entering into our communities like Springfield, Ohio, or other small towns across America are destroying the safety and security of those communities and overwhelming the infrastructure so that people can't even have clean water or decent schools any longer, and that people are suffering because we don't secure our borders. Is that generating misery, or is the antithesis, the opposite of that, the Democrat philosophy, Pavlovitz's philosophy, actually resulting in more misery for more people? Like, interesting conversation, but that's really not where I want to go with this show. So what Pavlovitz is doing is, and this is what I want to focus on from here on out, aside from the other contradictions that I've already outlined, and we could spend 1 or 2 or 3 shows going over all of that stuff. Here's the point in today's show. This is nothing more. He is nothing more. This post is nothing more than one more non-judgmental Christian, because that's what he would argue he is, that he's non-judgmental, he's inclusive, he's tolerant, he's affirming, he's not closed-minded, That's his whole mantra right now. And that's why he has stepped away from Orthodox Christianity, because it has too many rules and too many definitions, and it's too closed in terms of its ideology, its theology, its political and social agenda. It's too closed-minded. So he would fancy himself as a non-judgmental Christian, if he calls himself a Christian anymore. And he would say he fancies himself to be the exemplar of love and tolerance, telling us to be tolerant, not be hateful, to be inclusive, to be affirming, to not be judgmental. But you should be able to tell where I'm going to go with this right now. It's one more non-judgmental Christian who fancies himself to be our exemplar of love and tolerance, telling us that we should hate anyone he deems to be hateful and not tolerate anyone he has decided is intolerable. Do you get the duplicity here? It's self-refuting at every turn. And I just want to stop and say, do these people not think for a mere 2 seconds before they post this kind of nonsense? I mean, month after month, we're subjected to their foolish, self-refuting rants. And every week they tell us that they will not tolerate our intolerance. Every day they preach how they just hate hateful people. Every day they tell us about that. And not a minute goes by that they don't judge everyone else for being too judgmental. So in their rants against conservatives for being hateful, they actually come out and say they hate hateful people. They tell us that they can't tolerate our intolerance, that they just know nothing can be known, that they're sure nothing is sure. They're absolutely confident there are no absolutes. And then they turn around and judge everyone else while they scold everyone for being too judgmental. Their condemnation of others is endless. It's just endless, as they condemn everyone else for being too condemning. This lack of self-awareness is stunning. And with every post, they prove they are little more than just one more dirty pot, calling all the other kettles in the kitchen black. In their arrogance, they just can't seem to stop themselves. With hateful red faces, they lecture us about love. They rail against everyone who is religious while elevating their own dogma as the only good religion. In fact, this pastor, Pavlovitz, if you go to his website, he wears a t-shirt that says love is the only good religion or something like that. So he disparages Orthodox religion while elevating his own definition of love to the only good religion. So he's now the one who defines what good religion is and isn't, under the banner of disparaging good religion. Again, self-refuting at every turn. They keep sawing away at the branch upon which they sit, not recognizing that the thing is crumbling down. They're getting banged up and bruised, and they look very foolish in the process. Their mantra is as predictable as the sunrise. Value clarification is better than moral absolutes. Celebrating vice somehow results in virtue. Inflaming racial animus will bring an end to racism. Subordinating one person's right to live to another person's right to choose will result in the protection of every person's unalienable right to life. This makes no sense, obviously. That's why I'm saying it. Their mantra, it makes zero sense. Again, they teach values clarification in our schools, and they tell our children that values clarification is better than moral absolutes, but they're making that claim in an absolute fashion, that it's absolutely true that values clarification is better than moral absolutes, because we are sure that nothing is sure, and we're absolutely confident there are no absolutes, which is the pretext for values clarification, which is a moral absolute. It's a claim of being absolutely correct in refuting everybody else who believes in moral absolutes. And their claim of human dignity, that they're humanists, they believe in the value of the human being. So they subjugate one person's right to live, okay, an infant, a baby's right to live, to another person's right to choose, and they somehow believe that that results in the protection of every person's unalienable right to life. And radical humanism, the value of the human being. Again, it makes no sense. And the list goes on as they hoist themselves on their own petard. They boast of freedom and let live in bondage to their own sins. They champion human rights while ignoring the rights of anyone whom they pigeonhole as being politically right. They say they're pro-woman while denying that women are real, and while claiming to be defenders of children, they butcher young boys and girls in their clinics. And pretending to be champions of democracy, they mock the rule of law. On and on. Men like Pavlovitz are indeed what M. Scott Peck called people of the lie. And it seems as if the road to hell is before them, and they enter its gates strutting with the confidence of an emperor with no clothes. And if anyone dares to challenge them, they just belittle that person who dares to shout out that they're naked. St. Paul spoke of pastors, air quotes, like this some 2,000 years ago when he wrote, this is from 2 Timothy, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of self, boastful, proud, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. And to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. And they will turn away from the truth. That's in 2 Timothy. Now, if that doesn't describe the evangelicals, the emergent church, the progressive Christians, deconstructed Christians, pastors, quote unquote, like John Pavlovitz, I don't know what does. I mean, just listen to this. It's as if Paul is writing about exactly what's taking place right now in our culture and in our church. And I say in our church because he's the one, Pavlovitz is the one who says he's a pastor. That's a quote from C.S. Lewis. I'll read it in a minute. Back to St. Paul, the Apostle Paul, in 2 Timothy. There will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of self. He's elevating himself above God. Boastful. If he's not boastful, I don't know what is. Proud. I mean, they celebrate pride. They wave a banner in our face constantly. And he does this on his own website. Proud. Ungrateful. Ungrateful for what has been handed to him in terms of free society, a free culture. Capitalism versus communism. The protection of his rights to say stupid things like this. He's ungrateful, unholy, self-evident, without love. Is he being loving? Do you really think his language is loving? If you do, I think you need to go look up the definition of love. And by the way, love is not synonymous with tolerance, and tolerance is not synonymous with love. You don't tolerate everything, every behavior, every bad behavior out of the people you love. So you love them enough to step in their way and say, no, stop doing this. You're hurting yourself and you're hurting others. Love and tolerance are not synonymous. I've covered that in previous shows. Treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. People in this camp are elevating pleasure as the end-all and be-all of what it means to be a human being. And nobody else has the right to stand in the way of someone who is seeking pleasure, whether it be sexual or otherwise. And when somebody suggests, no, that's beyond the bounds. That search, that yearn, that hunger for pleasure does not define what it is to be a human being. In fact, there are some things that you want to do that you find pleasurable that you shouldn't do. You should restrain yourself because it's morally wrong to do so. I may be pleased, it may be pleasurable for me to steal your property, but I'm not supposed to do it. Sexual pleasure is not, you don't have license to pursue every sexual pleasure that you fancy would gratiate your desires. No, you're supposed to restrain yourself because certain sexual activities are outside the boundaries of what's moral and just and good and right. But Pavlovitz and his tribe think that any pleasure should be pursued without restraint, as long as it doesn't hurt somebody else. Well, I've got news for you. A lot of the pleasures that I just outlined do hurt somebody else. And sexuality, by definition, always involves another person, and therefore the other person is being hurt by your bad choices. Even if they consent to your bad choices, they're still being compromised by them. So Paul warns of this in 2 Timothy, as I've read to you twice now. And it's the likes of Pavlovitz that C.S. Lewis wrote about in his seminal work, Mere Christianity. And I want you to listen to this because I'm getting to the end of the show. I think Lewis has a perfect quote for what's going on right now concerning these people. And when he writes this, I think he's writing to the Pavlovitzes of the world, and you and me when we're tempted to fall into this type of ideology. All your life long, you are slowly turning either into a heavenly creature or into a hellish creature, either into a creature that is in harmony with God or else into one that is in a state of war and hatred with God and his fellow man. To be one kind of creature is heaven, to be the other means madness and horror, idiocy and rage. And each of us at each moment is progressing to one state or the other. I think Lewis is spot on right now. We are on a road right now, and every step you take is either in the direction of heaven or hell. And I'm not saying you gain heaven by your own efforts. No, it's by the grace of God that you're saved. It's a gift of God, lest any man should boast. So no, but in spite of the fact, or perhaps because of the fact of God's grace, in offering salvation to you, you are then obligated to take a step toward heaven at every given moment of every given day, or you're going to be taking a step in the opposite direction, and that is toward hell. And Lewis is telling us that people like Pavlovitz, in their anger and their arrogance and their pride, in their celebration of license rather than God's law, in their elevation of the human being and themselves over the fact that they need a savior, in the declaration that they can define what's good religion rather than God defining what is good and right and pure and beautiful and true. In their self-worship, they are taking steps toward hell on a day-by-day basis. All your life long, you are slowly turning either into a heavenly creature or into a hellish creature, either into a creature that is in harmony with God or one that is in a constant state of war and hatred with God. Does that sound like a sobering warning to pastors like John Pavlovitz? To one kind of creature, to be one kind of creature is heaven. To be the other kind of creature means madness, self-duplicity, self-deception, horror, rage, pride, idiocy. And each of us at each moment is progressing toward one state or the other. John Pavlovitz and his tribe are duplicitous, smug, and angry, prideful, mad demagogues who are corrupted in mind, and their folly is evident to all. Corrupted in mind, and their folly is evident to all. That's from 2 Timothy. And the best thing we can do with pastors like this is ignore them. Ignore them. Confront them. Call them out, and then walk away. Thinking human beings, anybody who is logical in any way whatsoever, even if you haven't embraced the gospel of Christ fully at this time, if anything I've said in the previous 30 minutes or so makes sense to you, if you're a thinking human being who understands the self-refuting nature of these ridiculous arguments of I can't tolerate your intolerance and I hate hateful people and I'm sure nothing is sure and I know nothing can be known and I'm absolutely confident that there are no absolutes. And my definition of love is the only good religion. Tolerance is the only good religion. Affirmation, acceptance is the only good religion. But I won't accept you and I won't tolerate you and I won't affirm you because I have good religion. This makes no sense. And thinking human beings should shun this nonsense and shun men like John Pavlovitz. Their words aren't worth the 5 minutes it takes you to read them. Step away. Step away. Say it's not true. Say it's a lie. Point it out very briefly and very quickly. Don't walk with them. Don't march with them. Don't affirm them. Don't tolerate them because they don't affirm you and don't tolerate you, and their claims to the contrary are garbage. It's nothing but a lie. It's nothing but a lie. I'm Dr. Everett Piper, and this is The Rebellion.